Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our fourth in our series of virtual Connect and Chat events. I'm Lauren Barker. I'm the CEO of CCYP. I want to welcome all of you this morning on a beautiful Tuesday, nice and sunny outside. Hope you all get out and enjoy that later. We are really pleased to have attorney Bruce Bierhans joining us today for part 2 in our 2-part crisis management series for nonprofits and small businesses. We have targeted nonprofits and small businesses through this 2-part series, but of course, I think the tips that are being shared so far are helpful for anybody. It's great insight that we were able to get last week with Megan of Chick Media on the crisis communication side of things. And this week, Bruce will be talking with us about legal issues, crisis management, and in particular, perhaps some situations that he's seen or encountered as of late with the COVID-19 crisis. I know we put out a call in advance for questions. If you didn't see that or didn't get a chance to submit them, please go ahead and start using that chat function to submit anything in particular that you think you might want to see covered in this session. We're very open to steering the conversation toward what's going to be most helpful for you. So before we get going, before I turn it over to Bruce, I want to first take a minute to thank our presenting sponsor for this virtual Connect and Chat series. Lisa Oliver, the CEO for the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod, is here with us on the line, and I want to turn it over to Lisa. Their bank has just announced a really exciting, I could ask everybody to mute their phones just for a second too before we get going. But the Cooperative Bank has just announced a really exciting and very generous level of support for the community, all the organizations that are on the front lines helping our community during this crisis. Was it $200,000, Lisa?
Yeah.
So incredible. So
thank you.
Of course, are really honored and grateful to be a year-round beneficiary of the Coop's generosity here in our community. And I think this latest announcement is just another demonstration of how the Coop is really a leader when it comes to philanthropic support of the community. We appreciate everything that you do. So I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thanks, Lauren. And I see Christina Bologna is on the call too, and she's our program lead for our philanthropic giving. And so we've been doing a lot of work around really analyzing what the community needs. And it's broad and it's wide, and you wish you could always do more, but let's just say hopefully it's although a very large gift for us, which we're excited to reach and do as much as we can, hopefully there's more behind that as we see how the year unfolds. And some of the best conversations we have are before this call begins, when we get to all sort of brainstorm and think about what's going on in the market. But we've been thrilled to support CCYP. The big events may be canceled, but it doesn't mean we can't communicate and think about how to share thoughts, ideas, work with and through the crisis that's going on in our world. Interestingly enough, and we have a 10 a.m. call every day talking about the pandemic. I think I want to change the name of it now and get it focused more on the green sprouts that are out there. So a phrase that I've used over time, and it's really appropriate for this time of year, is the fact that things are starting to grow. We're emerging from the winter, a challenging time. And I think for the pandemic too, we are clearly probably not halfway through the life of this, but I hope we're beginning to get to the point where we're cresting on some of the real crisis activity. And I pray that comes soon, but there's also green sprouts beginning to show. And so when we think about coming out of this, and I think people's brains, at least in our world, are starting to think about what that looks like. How do we continue to help the businesses? And we've got about, as I was saying this morning, 350 something applications that have been approved through the PPP program. What does it look like next? And certainly for those businesses and nonprofits, it's helping them figure out how to get that loan forgiven. because I don't think any business wants to come through this and saying, that's great, now I have a loan to pay off. So the green sprouts, though, are rampant. And I think that's a focus for all of us going forward, and realizing the importance of the relationships we've developed, the new ways of working. We had a little fun this morning as a team also in an early call, talking about some of the lessons learned. And I think that's where we can be the biggest help going forward. So we're working with Lauren to come up with a game plan to do some more work on talking about the process, talking about lessons learned, getting more businesses and nonprofits involved in applying, even though we feel like we're at the end of funding. I still haven't seen any specifics. It's a great rumor right now, and it's probably not too far from the truth, but we're also really hoping there's a next round of funding, and so we want to be able to help. But my biggest lessons learned, similar to when I was in college, is don't wear sweatpants every day or stretch pants, because when you actually go to put on a pair of jeans that buttons up, you're like, okay, that would be the first 5 pounds of my COVID-19 that I've gained. We were having a little fun with that. You're like, no, I haven't gained any weight. You're wearing sweatpants every day. Yeah. Anyway, I wish you guys all the best. Enjoy your time with Bruce today. He's a wealth of information. We will keep posted with all of you, and come back hopefully and get something together where we can even share more information that'll help nonprofits, small businesses, whatever we can do to help. And we're super excited about the grant that we've given to the community, grants that we've given to the community. So I will get off, let you guys take over. I know you have a lot to talk about today, and I got to go jump on my pandemic call. So we'll talk again soon. All righty.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
And we are working, as Lisa mentioned, with the Cooperative Bank to put together a session that's really meant to be an update on the PPP, or the Paycheck Protection Program, as well as other federal support that was released through the CARES Act that was passed a couple of weeks ago. So we want to sort of share from the bank's perspective and from others in the community that are close to this whole relief effort, what they're seeing, challenges, tips, best practices, all these good things, so that we can get the community support where it's needed most. So we will.
Looking forward to it.
More on
Bye.
that. Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so I want to invite everybody once again to use that chat feature, submit any questions that you have. I'm going to now turn it over to our esteemed speaker, Attorney Bruce Bierhans, who's here to cover our crisis management topic today. So Bruce, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Lisa, and thanks to the Coop for sponsoring the program. I can't honestly say that one of the things I've always wanted to do is speak about crisis management during a pandemic. Never really thought I'd have to do that, but here we are. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a business and trial lawyer. I've been a trial lawyer for 38 years. 18 years were spent in Boston, and 20 years have been on the Cape. I moved here in 2000. Since 2000, I've been the founder or chair of 10 nonprofit organizations. Some that you might know include Outer Cape Health Services, the Wellfleet Harbor Actors Theater, WOMR. More recently, Cape Wellness Collaborative. Some of you might be familiar with that because of the Dancing with the Docs event that we do in February. It's very well attended. And in addition to that, we have 3 lawyers in our firm. In fact, your president, Sarah Coles, has been with our firm for over 2 years now. And I've had my own firm for 23 years. We're also general counsel to many businesses and nonprofits, private and nonprofit. So I think that I have a pretty good perspective on some of the issues that are being faced, not only by nonprofits, but by small businesses. We probably represent well over 100 small businesses in our office. One of the interesting things that we'll discuss today is how do we, meaning small businesses and nonprofits, survive and prosper in an environment where human connection really as we know it, is on hold. In fact, I had just heard an expert on CNN a few minutes ago basically say that they believe, this was an expert who is the Surgeon General in the state of Florida, they believe that social distancing will be in place until there's a vaccine, which is actually fascinating because that means that we could be confronting the issues that we confront as businesses for another year or a year and a half. I mean, I, for example, have Billy Joel tickets in Fenway Park in August. And honestly, if there's not a vaccine, I can't imagine that I or probably anyone else would want to go to that concert at this point. So these are very, very serious issues that we're going to be confronting as we go forward. So this is really just the beginning of a very, very lengthy discussion about how we're all going to adapt and survive in what is the new normal. And frankly, I don't think anybody at this particular point, including the experts, really know what the new normal is. So today I'll talk a little bit about some of the legal and contractual issues that I think many of us are going to confront. But I'm really more interested in talking about how many of you young professionals are going to address change and survive in this environment. Even from the perspective of a law firm, I've had to give a great deal of thought in the past couple of weeks about things that we have to do from the perspective of client management, from the perspective of safety of our employees, how we're going to adapt and how we're going to address change in this new normal, whatever that new normal is. From a perspective of some of the legal issues that we're going to be dealing with, and I think a lot of you as business people will be dealing with, the most significant that we've dealt with in the past couple of weeks is what we call force majeure. I'll call it force majeure, just easy to pronounce. And that's basically a theory that is embedded in many contracts. And what it basically does is the concept excuses parties to an agreement from contractual obligations because of an unexpected event that is beyond their control. Many of you might know about the term act of God. That's really an interesting way to look at it as an act of God impact, an act of God result. And that this force majeure concept is going to affect so many businesses, particularly businesses that have contracts, service providers, real estate companies. It's going to affect landlord-tenant matters. It's going to affect the real estate industry. It's definitely going to affect the hospitality industry. Think about weddings that have been planned that people may want to cancel depending upon when the wedding is supposed to occur. Think about landlord-tenant leases. Think about real estate agreements between listing agents and customers. All those types of things could be affected by the force majeure concept. Many agreements that we've seen and that you might have seen that have force majeure provisions in them specify in detail all of the acts that could result in the excuse of a contractual obligation. Those include things like floods, fires, earthquakes, tornadoes. One of the things in the research I've done in the past couple of weeks that you don't see is a mention of pandemics. I haven't seen any agreements yet, even in my research, that actually mention pandemic, which is interesting because some of the language in these agreements that are very, very broad and don't specify many specific events talk about acts beyond the control of a party. Acts beyond control is language that is in many of these provisions. And what these provisions also provide very frequently is a duty to mitigate. For example, if you believe that you could be excused by an act of God or a force majeure provision, you also have the responsibility to mitigate the damage. In other words, can you perform in part, if it's a wedding, for example, can you provide the wedding within the context of social distancing, depending upon how many people are going to attend? Is there a way that you can work through these provisions or through these problems by somehow mitigating the damages? Is there a way that you can perform, if you can't perform all of your obligations, can you perform your obligations in part? These are all issues that get addressed in the force majeure provision. I'll deal with two issues in our office that have come up in the past couple of weeks to give you an idea as to how this provision might be impacted and how it might work. We represent two real estate companies. One is a traditional real estate company that lists summer rentals in the traditional fashion. They take a commission based upon every week that's rented, and based upon the rental received, they take the commission and they pay the owner a certain amount of money based upon the amount of the rental. We represent another client who has a very, very different type of rental business, one that can be much more profitable, but also very, very, very dangerous. And what this real estate company does is he gives the property owner a guarantee. He says that whether we rent your place or not, I'm going to pay you $20,000 for the summer. Now, if he doesn't rent the property, he's out the $20,000, but what he'll try to do is he'll try to rent the property for $25,000 or $30,000, and that's how he makes his money. As you can imagine, he has an obligation now, as we sit here today, to pay owners hundreds of thousands of dollars because he has guaranteed them in advance that he's going to cover their rentals. So for the person that is dealing in the traditional rental concept, it may not be much of a problem. They might have to decide during what period of time they give refunds to people that want to cancel, for example, in May or in June. Then as you get into July and August, more decisions might have to be made. But that real estate, that rental agent really might not have much of a problem. The guy that has guaranteed hundreds of thousands of dollars out there has a real problem. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, we sent a notice out to all of our clients indicating that we wanted to try to work out alternative arrangements so that we could pay them in part based upon the actual rental period that ultimately transpires. And there may not be a rental period on the Cape at all this summer. We honestly don't know that. And one of the first responses we got back was from a Harvard law professor who said, I want my $50,000. And if you don't give me my $50,000, I'm going to sue you. And of course, this was someone who was a Harvard law professor. So suffice it to say that one way or another, I expect that there's probably going to be a fair amount of litigation over the issue of force majeure, who has to perform, who's going to be excused from performance, under what circumstances can they perform in part. And again, I see that coming up as an issue in literally every industry on the Cape, every service industry, every hospitality industry, and particularly in the real estate industry. There's other legal doctrines that apply to people's contractual obligations, such as impossibility. In other words, an event may occur that makes it impossible to perform your obligations, and does that excuse you? There's another legal theory called frustration of purpose. There's another legal theory called impracticability, and all of them involve events or make performance impractical or impossible by either party. They also all deal with the issue of foreseeability. In other words, is the act one that could have been foreseeable under the circumstances? And certainly, you can easily argue from a legal perspective that this pandemic, although when you really think about it, if you've watched some of the discussion given by Bill Gates actually predicted this in 2015. So I see a chat here. What does it say? Can you speak?
Yeah, that was me. So I was thinking about, just in keeping with what you've been discussing, you know, with contractual obligations, a lot of nonprofits have grant funding that's under contract. Have you encountered issues with that? Is it different, the same than some of the more traditional business contracts that you're seeing?
We haven't seen anything like that yet. I don't know if anybody else has encountered it in their nonprofit. Obviously, it would depend upon the grant. It would depend upon the language of the grant. It might depend upon the purpose of the grant. For example, if you were given a grant, many grants are given for a specific function or a specific project or a specific event. Obviously, if you can't put that event on, if you can't put on that charitable event for which you might have received a grant, you know, then there's going to be the issue of whether or not that grant funder has to fund you if you're unable to perform and engage in the purpose for which the grant was given. So I expect we'll probably see that. I have not seen it yet. We were talking about, we were talking about the issue of foreseeability. So foreseeability is going to be a very interesting issue that comes up in a legal context, because on the one hand, many of us might say, well, how the hell could we have predicted this? On the other hand, you had Bill Gates giving speeches in 2015 warning about pandemics. So there's going to be a lot of litigation in all of these contexts. And that's why people often ask me whether or not we have a seasonal business. Law is not a seasonal business, human nature being what it is. I think we have a recession-proof business. And unfortunately, sometimes during times like these, we're busier even than we want to be. But in any of these cases, in all of these cases, if someone were to call me and ask, well, what do I do next? The first thing I would say is you have to look at every situation individually. Every fact situation might be different. I would have to look at the contractual language, look at the circumstances, look at the time frames. I think a lot of situations are going to change based upon whether performance is in June or July or August or even September. I mean, hopefully, I'm hoping we learn a lot more in the next 2 weeks as this curve that we all hear about begins to go down, hopefully in different parts of the country. But again, I was actually really surprised this morning to hear the Florida Surgeon General talk about the fact that he believes social distancing ought to occur until there is actually a vaccine. That really changes, that changes the picture dramatically. So in all of these situations, obviously the first thing you need to do is look at your individual situation and of course, contact your lawyer. Other issues that I've seen come up and I've been contacted about in the last week are the issue of what crises and what issues are confronted by consumers. For example, if you book through VRBO, if you're expecting a refund from an airline, we're going to see a lot of those types of things. Some of the airlines have already relaxed their own contractual exclusions, whereby if you have a flight that you've booked during a certain period of time, even though it was non-refundable, they are giving refunds to people that I've seen, JetBlue, American Airlines, even through the end of the summer. I've seen a lot of problems both online and in some phone calls I've received from people who booked vacations through VRBO or Expedia who aren't getting any answers whatsoever. Just imagine if you booked a house in June on the Cape for $4,000 or $5,000 and you're not getting your telephone calls answered or you're not getting responses online. Obviously, many people are concerned about that. I know I saw yesterday that Marriott was offering refunds through the rest of the summer, but with the consolidators, Expedia, VRBO, HomeAway, entities like that, people are having a lot of problems. But the other thing, one positive thing that I see as you're thinking about how you're going to survive and how you're going to get through all this, it's really an excellent time to review your business structures, make sure you're adequately protected, make sure your assets are protected in case you do get sued, make sure that your LLCs are formed, that your operating agreements are up to date, that you have the Chinese wall, as we call it, between your personal assets and your business assets, so that if you do get sued, you don't find someone putting a lien on your house. Maybe you ought to be reviewing your existing contracts. Do you have contracts that have force majeure provisions in them? If so, do you want to put one in? And I can tell you right now that if you came to our office next week and you put one in, we are going to list every single act of God event that we can think of that's going to be in that contract, because if you listen to the scientists as well, this is not the last pandemic we're going to see. Many of the people that I've heard that are in the public health field have been talking about the fact that this is very likely to be a reoccurring event. One thing I hear a lot about recently is people have asked me about business interruption insurance. What I say to them is good luck. One of the things that the insurance companies were very, very careful about is putting in their in their exclusions, exclusions for, and I've done some research in this, and some of these specific terms I've seen are viruses, illnesses. Some of them do include the words pandemics, but in a lot of the research I've done in the past couple of weeks about business interruption insurance, because I know we're going to be getting calls from clients about that, is whether or not the standard exclusions include the word virus, and almost every one of them that I've seen do. I haven't seen one situation yet where someone made a claim on their business interruption coverage and was told that they were covered. One of the things I wanted to talk about is the issue of what I talked about in the beginning, the new normal. And I think obviously none of us know what the new normal is, but again, I think that it's going to be something that is going to have to be dealt with by literally every industry on the Cape, including service companies, hospitality. I don't know what a lot of the businesses, some of the young professionals here are in, but I suspect that many of them are in the service industry. And as I look at how we're going to cope with these types of things, I think of words like engagement, collaboration, adaptation, and change. One of the things in the 10 nonprofits that I've been involved with over the course of the past 20 years that I work with a lot, and that it's actually one of my favorite words in the English language, is collaboration. I've been very, very fortunate to see so much collaboration, particularly between nonprofits. And I've seen it a lot in the last couple of weeks. On March 17th, I formed a new nonprofit in Wellfleet with a restaurant called the Fox and Crow. And I was thinking one night about how this was before the schools decided to feed students. And I was thinking about how the students were going to get meals. So I talked to a woman that owns the Fox and Crow restaurant, who's a client of mine. And I said, and I knew that she would be interested in this. And I said, Trudy, we need to start to feed people, particularly students. Well, we started serving meals on March 17th. We formed the nonprofit. And by March 18th, Trudy and I realized that this wasn't just a student issue, that we had shell fishermen and shellfish families where the shell fishermen weren't selling to restaurants. So many of the people in Wellfleet and in the Outer Cape that work in the hospitality industry were getting laid off. So within one day, we changed our concept from serving meals to students to serving meals to everybody. As of tomorrow, in just 3.5 weeks, we've raised over $40,000, and we will have served 2,500 meals as of tomorrow. And I've been working in the kitchen every day since we started, and it's actually been wonderful to see not only how many people initially came in, and we went to delivery only. We started out as grab and go, so during the first week I saw all the families that were coming in and the gratitude that they expressed. But after a week, we realized it was the demand was just too much, so we went to delivery only, and we're now delivering about 140 meals a day. But the reason I mentioned collaboration is what has been the most thrilling aspect of forming this entity for me has been the number of restaurants and the number of organizations that have provided us with food or other services. Restaurants as far as the Old King's Coffee House in Yarmouth was a client of ours. All of the food that they had that was perishable, they donated to us. A lot of the shellfish farmers have donated to us. All of the food pantries have donated to us. And it's just been an incredible collaboration between private and nonprofit entities to provide a very needed service. So I think that one of the things that all businesses are going to have to do in this new environment that we confront is think about how they can change, how they can adapt, how they can take advantage of their relationships. How are you going to distinguish yourself? How are you going to make yourself different from other organizations so that you can survive? What will be the roadmaps that you will follow? And for those of you that may or may not be involved in nonprofit organizations, I can tell you from my own personal story, when I moved here in 2000, it really wasn't my intent to open up a law firm. In fact, I wasn't going to. My wife and I, my wife runs my offices. We commuted from Wellfleet to Stoughton for 5 years. And I slowly developed a client base on the Outer Cape in particular, but it still wasn't my intent to open up an office on the Cape, which we now have had for 16 years. But two things happened that I got very lucky about. One was I became involved as a defense lawyer in a very high-profile murder case where I went from being someone that no one knew to someone that a lot of people knew because I was on the front page of the newspaper every day. But the other thing that happened was in 2006, someone asked me to help the two founders of Wellfleet Preservation Hall get Wellfleet Preservation Hall off the ground. And I became one of the founders of that organization, and it's still on the board. But for some reason, the Wellfleet Preservation Hall nonprofit led to Outer Cape Services. I was chairman there for 5 years. And that has now turned into either being the founder or chairman of 10 nonprofits. But one of the things that has done, and very often people ask me whether or not I ever went into a nonprofit to get business. Absolutely no, not in any case. If you're thinking of going into a nonprofit or being part of a nonprofit, it ought to be something that you believe in, something that is going to engage you, something that you feel will provide you with some satisfaction. CCYP being one of those great organizations. But never go into a nonprofit that is not something that engages you in something you feel good about, because you probably won't like it, and you won't be able to provide the services to the organization that they really need. But I have found all of the nonprofits that I've been involved in just to be a great way to meet spectacular people and wonderful people and selfless people all over the Cape. And it's definitely been something that I value, but it certainly has helped the law firm, at least from the perspective of allowing me to meet just a lot of wonderful people. So for those of you that aren't involved in any nonprofit organizations, it's something that you should definitely consider doing, both for yourself and for your communities. I think that, let me see what else I had online to talk about here. I was going to talk about Darwinism at all, because I do believe that the organizations that do the most and give more consideration to how they can change and how they can adapt and how they can meet this new environment are definitely going to survive. And we will see business failures. I mean, there's no question about the fact that we'll see business failures. But I'm really concerned about an area where I've been involved with a lot. I was chairman of the Arts Foundation for 3 years. I was chairman and CEO of the Wellfleet Harbor Actors Theater. I've been very involved with the arts community. In fact, before I moved back in 2000, I was actually an actor on the Cape as a teenager. So I've been involved in arts and culture since I was 14 years old when I moved here from the Bronx in New York. Very concerned about the arts and cultural community and how they're going to get through this particular period of time. One other thing to think about for those of you that are younger than I am, I actually went on Medicare this year, so I guess that makes me a Cape Cod old professional. Is the issue of succession. I noticed that Jean Curry is one of the people that's listening today, and I don't know if Jean is older than me or maybe a little bit younger, but I would be lying if I didn't tell you that one of the things that the pandemic has made me think about, even in my own law firm, is the issue of succession, and how I can incorporate my lawyers into a position where at some point as I get older, or as Jean gets older, someone else can step into my shoes and begin to exercise more responsibility and ultimately become an owner of the practice. I think for those of you that are younger, that may be involved or work with businesses where you have older partners or older owners, go to them and start to talk about the issue of succession. think about ways that they can bring you into the business so that you can be owners at some particular point. It's definitely something that I've been thinking about, and I think probably is something that's very important for a lot of young people. So we can talk about this all week. I've got all kinds of issues on my paper here, but I know we don't have a lot of time left, and I know that some people probably have questions. So why don't I stop there and see what questions you might have.
Bruce,
Oh, go ahead.
I see that Lauren raised a question about bylaws and governance needs for nonprofits. And one of the things we've been looking at is the question of virtual board meetings, even virtual annual meetings. Recently, the Securities and Exchange Commission issued a guidance that would allow for virtual shareholder meetings in the for-profit context. We don't have that in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for nonprofits. I tend to think that unless we see some change in the law, that's going to be a little difficult, because one of the things in the nonprofit in the Chapter 180 is at annual meetings, you've got to have a mechanism for members to make nominations from the floor. So I think that's going to be something we're going to see evolving, perhaps some guidance from the Attorney General's office. But one thing you might want to think about is having your bylaws speak to virtual board meetings. There are some platforms specifically geared to nonprofits and to assist in developing virtual board meetings, and not only the platform, but also kind of the logistics of how you're going to do it. So that's something I think if you've got a nonprofit, you want to be looking at electronic voting, virtual meetings, things of that nature.
Definitely. And in fact, I don't know how many people have had virtual board meetings over the course of the past couple of weeks. I had 3 yesterday. Yeah, it's definitely, there's no question about it. It is something we're all going to have to take into consideration and incorporate into our bylaws, and allow for these types of events to take place, particularly if some of the things they're talking about in relation to social distancing are going to be with us for 6 months or a year or even a year and a half. I mean, it's hard to even imagine social distancing being the new normal for the next year and a half, but it's obviously a possibility. It's going to be something we'll have to deal with. I can't even begin to think of how the court system is going to address that. I mean, obviously one of the ways that the court system is going to address that is we're going to be having motion hearings, and certainly not trials, but certainly motion hearings on Zoom or by telephone or whatever the case might be. So there's just a multitude of things we're going to have to address. But to respond to your comment, yeah, for virtual board meetings is something definitely going to have to be the new norm. There's no question about that. Sarah, in the absence of guidance from the Attorney General's office regarding virtual meetings, should we be looking to amend our bylaws? Oh, yeah, absolutely. No question about it. Jean just addressed that issue, so yeah, there's no question about that.
Bruce, do you have a suggested resource or model language of any kind that you would recommend? I know we sometimes refer to the Mass Nonprofit Network and the Society for Nonprofits. Those are both great resources. Do you have others that you would recommend if people are looking to amend their bylaws to allow for virtual voting?
There's some question and answer sheets that I look at occasionally from the Attorney General's office. Most of the bylaws that I've done for nonprofits over a period of years don't come from any particular source. You know, I tend to draft them depending upon the organization and the specific needs of the organization. I don't use any particular template, to be honest with you. I'm sure there are resources out there, but none in particular that I use as a go-to resource.
Thank you. And then I know we had a question come in from Ayana Parent, who's on the line again today, regarding organizations that might be in between statuses. So her organization is currently pending nonprofit status. Is that right, Ayana? Do you want to chime in with that question?
I'm just going to unmute myself so I can be a little more clear. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we applied for the nonprofit. So we just don't have the 501(c) number yet. And we're waiting for the IRS letter to come in. So, I mean, it's hard to say, like, I can't really apply for the small business grants because technically we are a nonprofit as of the second week of March. And then, but I don't have anything to show that we are. So I'm like stuck in terms of like how to apply for money right now.
Have you talked to anyone, Ayana, about Fiscal Agency? Do you know what that is?
No.
What happens, and for example, in the organization I just formed, we have the same issue. When you form a Massachusetts nonprofit, that's what you are at that time. You are a Massachusetts nonprofit. You do not have 501(c)(3) status with the IRS. So where someone makes a donation to you, it's deductible on their Massachusetts tax return, but not on their federal tax return.
Right.
The problem with that, what type of organization are you in?
I'm a wellness center, so it's like a movement and mindfulness center.
Oh, okay. You must be familiar with Cape Wellness, I would think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what happens is, for example, Cape Cod Foundation is an example. There are many organizations that do have 501(c)(3) status that will act as your fiscal agent. To give you an example of what I just did this week, because we're now also waiting for our 501(c)(3) status for Common Table, which could take anywhere from 2 to 6 months. And,
Right.
and these days, who knows how long it's going to take. You can find another organization that has 501(c)(3) status that will act as your fiscal agent. And
Gotcha.
what that means is you can then go to a bank. You can go to the Coop. You can go harass Christina Bologna. And she will tell you that I can't give you a grant unless you have 501(c)(3) status or unless you have a 501(c)(3) fiscal agent. So what happens in that? So what happened with Common Table was I was able to convince another board that I'm on, Wealthly Preservation Hall, to act as our fiscal agent so that a bank or an institution would then make a grant or write a check to Wealthly Preservation Hall for Common Table. And that allows you to receive grants and donations that are federally tax deductible until you receive your 501(c)(3) approval letter from the IRS. You don't get a separate EIN. Your EIN is the only number that the IRS gives you, but you do have 501(c)(3) status at that point. So for you, if there's another organization that you're familiar with or that where you know people, a lot of organizations don't like to do it because they have an extra level of paperwork that's involved, because they have to process and segregate all of the funds that they receive for you, because what then happens is they take an administrative fee, usually 5%. So if someone makes a $10,000 donation to you, it goes to the fiscal agent. The fiscal agent takes out their 5% and then gives you the balance. That's how it works.
Bruce?
So, yeah.
Can I hop in here?
Sure.
One of the things to think about, Ayana, I just advised one of my nonprofits that just started, and they're still in the process of applying for their 501(c)(3) status. However, when I was reviewing the EIDL application, it specified that in order to apply as a nonprofit, you either had to have your 501(c)(3) or proof from the state that you were a nonprofit. And I suggested to my client that your articles of organization, which are issued by the state, you can download them from the Secretary of State's website, specify that you're a nonprofit. And I'm encouraged my client to submit for the $10,000 EIDL grant based upon, and use that and see what happens. I think there's a good argument that that's sufficient evidence to justify your qualifying for that grant.
Ayana, what's the name of your organization?
It's Be Free Coaching and Wellness.
Okay. Where is it located?
I'm in Harwichport.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful. I can look into that, I think. And we should get at least the document that says we're a nonprofit without the 501(c). So I think that would help too.
Oh, that's your article. Yeah, Gina, all you need to do is print out your articles. When you
Yeah, I don't have it yet, but the lawyer that I'm working with said I should have that very, very soon.
Was the organization actually formed?
The nonprofit?
Yeah.
Yep.
All you need to do is if you go into the Secretary of State's website and pull up the corporations division, if you put your name in, you can search by name, your articles will come right up.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Thank you.
That's why you're on the call.
Thank you.
Good luck to you. You're doing great work.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Feel free to submit them. Anybody finding specific challenges or successes in this area? Anything that you've encountered? I know we've talked a lot about the nonprofit side of things. Anything from our small business people on the line?
One of the things that I wanted to hear people talk about is I've done a lot of reading in the last couple of weeks about things that business owners are going to have to deal with and things that we're going to have to confront. And again, particularly if social distancing is something that we have to deal with for quite some time. I've read a lot about the issue of safety of employees. In other words, how you're going to ensure the safety of your employees in a social distancing world. I'm kind of curious about how many people that might be on the call have businesses and offices where there are a number of people that, you know, whether it be 3 or 4 or 5 or 10, how many people go to work every day? Have you given any thought about changes that you might make in your office or practices that you might implement in your offices just to provide for the utmost level of safety for your employees? Has anybody had to deal with any of those types of issues or thought about those types of issues?
Bruce, we're working pretty much remotely from our office. I have a client with a particular challenge. They're not on the Cape, they're a manufacturing company. I've known for a long time that they manufacture for the Defense Department, but I learned recently in talking to my client that they also manufacture parts for ventilators. And they've been told in no uncertain terms that they will not close. But at the same time, my client's employees, they work with heavy equipment that can't be easily moved, and it makes social distancing very difficult. And so they're looking at trying to get as much masks and other personal protective equipment as they can for the employees, because the employees are worried about coming into work.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else deal with distancing issues in their offices? What are some of the tools that people are using to work remotely? Obviously, you know, Zoom is something that all of us are using. I've had a couple of meetings with Google Hangouts, which I found doesn't work anywhere near as well as Zoom does. But what are some of the tools, whether it be software programs or other types of things like that, are people using to enable them to work remotely? Anything CCYP is using?
We've been focusing on Zoom. We've tried Google Hangouts and kind of had the same experience. It felt a little less smooth, but we were already using Zoom for almost a year, I think, before this. So it's maybe a lot of it is just user experience and what we're used to. So I think people kind of have to experiment and find what works best for them. Microsoft Teams, VPNs.
Are there any other issues, Lauren, that you've been hearing about? I think to a certain extent, this is still new to so many of us that I don't think a lot of businesses, I think so many businesses have been focused in the past couple of weeks on the payroll protection loan.
Yeah.
Or the economic disaster loan, that they really haven't yet sat back and had to take the time to think about, you know, my God, how am I gonna,
Yeah.
where am I gonna be for 6 months? Am I still gonna be here? And what am I gonna do to help my business survive? Are you hearing any other types of issues and different types of businesses?
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe we haven't heard as much, but I would anticipate becoming more and more of an issue if this does go on longer, are going to be HR policies, because we have a lot of small to mid-sized businesses and nonprofits that might not do regular updates of their employment policies or employment handbooks. There are all kinds of things pertaining to this, you know, sick leave policies and everything else that they might need to get in and clean up or amend. So I could see that being a potential issue moving forward, just making sure that everyone's on the same page with what's expected. And because I think we've been very much in a crisis state, it's been sort of a, well, we'll figure it out later approach, or just do what we have to do right now and we'll, you know, pick up the pieces in the future. I think that future is going to be coming up, you know, as we near this stay-at-home order expiration date and we see what's going to happen next from the state. You know, what are businesses and nonprofits going to need to consider with their internal policies? You know, we've talked a lot about contracts and external relationships, but I think those internal ones are equally, if not more important, for those that don't have HR specialists on staff.
Gene, what are you doing in the Barnstable House? I mean, in our firm, obviously, you know, we're one firm in one office, but in your building, you have a number of firms there. What are people doing as far as social distancing and communicating with each other, or going into work, when they're going to work?
Well,
what are you seeing in your building?
we are generally, actually, I have not been going in very much. My associate has been going in quite a bit because, unfortunately for her and her husband, they were in the middle of remodeling their house when the governor's order hit. And they don't have a stove, they don't have a refrigerator, and they've got all their furniture in one room. But in our particular building, there's not many people coming in and out. Our offices each have a separate office, so even if both of us are there, it's very easy to do social distancing. But most of the offices in the building are closed. There aren't a lot of people coming in. I was in the office yesterday and there were only 2 other people in the building while I was there.
Interesting.
One of the things I would mention, as people are starting to work remotely, is you've got to be very cautious about the information you share. Massachusetts has some of the most significant and stringent data security regulations in the country. And if you send, for example, personal information, personally identifiable information, which is generally a name and some number that can be associated with identity theft, such as a check number or a credit card number, that has to be encrypted. And if you fail to do that, and there's a identity theft, you can be sued for under Chapter 93A, which means trouble, damages, attorney's fees. Not to mention, it's obviously not a public relations home run to have your data breached. So that's why I mentioned virtual private networks, because it adds a layer of security. And I'm concerned that people who are moving from working in an office to doing things remotely are going to just be sending information and not realizing, oh, this client came in and paid their bill and here's a copy of the check, or here's the credit card receipt, or things of that nature. We also, Bruce, from a business perspective, up until this point, we did not take credit cards or PayPal, but we're now doing that in order to make it easier for clients to pay us remotely and not have to worry about getting checks at the office.
Yeah,
Really
I mean,
great point. Yeah. Awesome. Point.
I mean, Gene, we've taken credit cards for years now, and I can tell you that at least 50% of our clients pay with credit cards. So that's definitely a wise thing to do. I do see a question here from Pat. I work with a couple of small business owners who have been approved for PPP, but are worried that if the program is not extended, they may face some severe issues afterwards, debt payments, etc., if they were to review and amend their legal policies now in anticipation of that, would they be protected down the road? Amend their legal policies, how, Pat? What are you thinking about?
Well, I'm not thinking about anything. I don't provide legal advice. I'm a financial planner, so I kind of tiptoe this line a little bit. But you know, they've expressed concern that if a second round of stimulus doesn't come through, they're kind of starting to hear these horror stories of businesses that haven't gotten out in front of this, that are dragging their feet a little bit and exposing themselves to some type of liability. I mean, as you said before, it's just best practices to go back and look at all your contracts and your policies and bylaws, just to make sure there aren't any holes there. I guess the question is more on the timing of it. This is a long process, this pandemic. We don't know how long it's going to last. If someone makes updates now, it doesn't necessarily protect them from something that's happened in the last month, right?
Well, I think what you talk more about asset protection. In other words, obviously, if anyone is in business right now and they're concerned about where they're going to be 6 months or a year from now, they ought to, at the very least, make sure that their personal assets are not exposed, that their personal assets are segregated from whether it be their corporation or their LLC or whatever the case might be. That would be one of the first things that I'd be looking at. I mean, obviously, if you go under or if you don't survive, that may well be something that is something terrible for your business, but you definitely don't want to have your personal assets exposed. And I don't think, from the timing of it, to answer your question, if you do something like that now, unless it's to an existing creditor, in other words, if you already have an attachment on your house, or if you've got some sort of a judgment against you, that could arguably considered what's called a fraudulent conveyance. But I think engaging in, to use your term, best practices, or engaging in any actions now to protect your personal assets, I don't anticipate that as being a problem at all.
So if you're a sole prop or something like that, and you not expect, but just are worried that there's exposure or things like that, you'd be wise to just, go get an S Corp or an LLC set up as soon as you can, just to separate the business and personal interest.
I have to tell you, Pat, I don't recommend that anyone be a sole proprietor. I mean, I can't tell you, seriously, there's no reason for it. With the single member LLC option out there, I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had, a tradesperson, a contractor come into my office that was a sole proprietor and, took a magnetic sign and stuck it on the side of a truck, and now they're in business. Yeah. And that first day that you get sued and someone tries to put an attachment on your house, you realize how important it was. I mean, you can become a single member LLC with legal fees for, $1,200. Right. And insulate yourself and protect yourself. So I don't recommend anyone, I don't care what business, to be a sole.
Okay.
There's very few pieces of one size fits all legal advice, but if you are a business owner, getting a homestead on your personal residence is one of those pieces of advice. It's incredibly cheap, and it protects your house from being attached up to $500,000. And it's incredibly easy to do.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. If anybody else has additional questions, feel free to send those to us. We can pass them along to Bruce. We really, really appreciate your time today, Bruce. Thank you for taking an hour out of your day to address these issues. I think that they're especially timely, and as things unfold more, we might even need to revisit, from the perspective of a new normal, as you noted, what else people might need to be looking at once we're past the crisis state of all of this. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thanks again to Bruce. Be on the lookout. We'll be making an announcement about future sessions. And again, as I offered last week, I want to put the invitation out there that if you have specific topics that you'd like us to try to cover and get speakers in on, we're more than happy to accept those suggestions, so send them our way to info@capecodyoungprofessionals.org. You can post them to our social media pages as well. And stay tuned for more sessions. We're going to hope to roll some more out here in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe and well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.